Console generations are not as significant as they used to be, and I think that this fact plays well into Nintendo's hands here. When you look at console generations over time, each successive generation brings with it less impressive gains than the last. So each time we get a new system, the amount of improvement that we get is just a little bit less each and every time. This is incredibly evident when you look at the current the current generation, because the PS5 and the Xbox Series, those, when we look at the games that we're playing on those, a lot of people would look at those and say, I could just play those on a PS4. You know what I mean? And I think that this helps Nintendo out in a big way, because I think that the Switch 2 is a much bigger improvement over the Switch 1 than the PS5 is over the PS4, or the Xbox Series is over the Xbox One. And essentially, the transition from last gen to this gen was a little unimpressive. But I have to say, the Switch 2 compared to the Switch 1 is very impressive. I know that there's a lot of people who are a little unhappy that Nintendo is foregoing innovation for iteration. And I completely understand why, but I disagree. I think that Nintendo iterating on its current hardware is the right move. Let me explain why. Most systems that Nintendo ships have some kind of gimmick. Either it's a control gimmick or it's some kind of hardware gimmick. And Nintendo is very good at making those gimmicks seem awesome. But third parties always struggle to encapsulate these gimmicks into their games, mostly because their games are made for other systems and then they're ported for the Nintendo system. And then they try and shoehorn in the gimmick for the Nintendo system, and it just never really works out all that well. And so with Nintendo essentially saying our gimmick this time is that if you want, you can use mouse mode, that's a very ignorable gimmick. And because it's ignorable, I think that a lot of devs simply will ignore it, and most players will also probably ignore it. But the games that don't ignore it, it's pretty easy to implement, and the players who really like it will be able to use it. So I do think that it's something that will get used more often than something like dual screen stuff like on the Wii U. So I think that it's good that Nintendo decided to iterate this time, because they found success and now they're making the same thing just better. Before we go any further, I do want to point out that this is just a first impressions video. I've only had my hands on with the Nintendo Switch 2 for a few hours at this point, and my full review, where I'm going to deep dive about everything that I can, is coming next week. So if that's something that you're looking forward to, make sure that you subscribe for that and turn on notifications so that you don't miss it. All right, let's talk about my experience so far. After, I'm looking at the clock now, I'm going to say 6 hours with the Nintendo Switch 2. Let's talk about the build quality of this thing. I have to say that the Switch 2, I would say, has a build quality that is, it's approaching smartphone level build quality. And that's because they don't make it very repairable. This is a good thing and a bad thing. The reason why handheld PCs are kind of low on the build quality scale isn't because those companies don't care, but it's because they're making them more repairable. Nintendo does not want you repairing their stuff. They want to repair it themselves. That's why they have repair centers. And that's why they opened those when we had joystick drift and people would send in their stuff and then they would send back new stuff. It's much easier for Nintendo to fix these things than it is for us. That sucks for us, but it also means that the build quality can be a little bit higher, or at least it can seem a little bit higher, because the device is so thin. And oh my God, having a screen this big on a device this thin that plays games that look the way they do it is a very, very impressive system, at least to me. When I got home from work today, the first thing that I did was grab my Switch 1, grab my Switch 2, grab the cords for both of those systems, plug them into my desk so that I could start transferring all of my information from my Switch 1 to my Switch 2. And I'm here to tell you that the transfer process is dummy proof. I don't remember off the top of my head how long it took. You'll see it sometime during this video, how long it took to actually go through the whole process. But when I was all done and then I started downloading my games, I was really surprised to find out that my Switch 1 didn't get erased. I think this has something to do with Nintendo's new way of having their digital game cards, because in the past, when I had my original Nintendo Switch that I bought on launch, when I bought the new one, not the OLED one, the one before that had a new chip that was, more efficient and gave you longer battery life, when I transferred that over, when I was done, it erased my original Nintendo Switch. When I bought the OLED Switch, when I transferred from the new longer battery life Switch to the OLED Switch, it erased my Switch when I was done. I expected that the Switch 2 would erase the Switch 1 when it was done, but it didn't. All of my stuff is still on that Switch, and I can still play on that Switch because of the virtual game cards. And I even had to go through that process once while I was setting it up. By the way, one thing that it took me a little bit to figure out, when you are going to play a game that you own digitally, which most of my games are owned digitally, every time you launch a game for the first time, it's going to be like, hey, do you want to put in your virtual game card? And I was like, I wanted to say, well, just say yes all the time. Why are you asking me every single time? Of course I want to. If I'm clicking on an icon, I want to play a game. But then what I noticed is that there's, in the menu bar on the bottom, there's a new menu where you can go in and look at your digital game cards, and you can insert a bunch of them all at once. I went through and inserted all the ones that I thought that I was probably going to check out. And it was very weird to me because as I was doing it, it said 0 out of 30. And then I would add a game and it would say 1 out of 30. And I didn't add 30 games because I didn't want it to be downloading forever. I wanted to actually be able to use it. But I'm going to talk more about this in my next video and my full review on it. If you can only do 30 game cards, that's concerning. I don't think that's the case. Maybe you can only load 30 at once, and then when you go to load more, you could do it again. But I didn't want to wait for it to finish downloading, so that'll have to be in the next video. Moving on to the Joy-Cons. The Joy-Cons are bigger. Of course they are, because we have a bigger Switch now. The Joy-Cons have to get bigger, and thank God that the Joy-Cons got bigger because they feel so much better than the originals. They still don't feel like a real controller, but they're a big improvement over the originals. In addition to that, all of the buttons on this Switch 2 Joy-Cons are larger and easier to hit. They're still very clicky. They're still very low travel. They don't stick up very far. I still think that people are probably going to want to pick up a Pro controller or a third-party controller. I haven't had time to test it yet. I was talking to my friend Russ. He told me that one of his 8BitDo controllers just was not recognized by the Switch at all. I'm really hoping that this is an oversight or something that just needs to be patched in and not something that is a real problem. If I find out more, obviously, I'll talk more about this in the next video, but if I find out more, I will put a little blurb down in the description below that like button so that I can update you if I find out more information. But as it stands right now, some third-party controllers just are not working. The D-pad on the Joy-Cons, it's the same kind of D-pad that we had on the original Nintendo Switch. I know that people didn't like that. As somebody who doesn't play a lot of fighting games, I was perfectly fine with it because for me, 99 times out of 100, it's just a weapon selector or something like that. And most of the time when I play platformers, because I'm a filthy casual, I just use the joystick anyway. That said, I did fire up Ultimate Street Fighter 2, and I tried to fire off some Hadoukens and some Shoryukens, and I have to say, it's actually pretty good. It worked very, very well. It is, as Russ always says, Hadoukenable and Shoryukenable. I had no problems doing complicated inputs using the weird D-pad that the Nintendo Switch 2 has. I think that the improved size of the buttons definitely helps. And they're also just a little bit further apart, which helps as well. The face buttons, they're exactly the same as the D-pad on the other side, so there's not really a whole lot to say there. Let's talk about the sticks. The sticks are still not full-size controller sticks, but they are bigger and taller and a little bit wider. You have more of a throw than you did on the original Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. I like these much better, but they're still not all the way there what I would like to see. And of course, Nintendo, for some reason, I don't understand why, they still insist on just having digital triggers for their Joy-Cons. I absolutely hate it. I don't understand why you would do that. It limits so many games that you would otherwise really want to have, especially racing games. Why wouldn't they give us that option? Well, here's one thing that I will say. I am looking forward to, and they're not sponsored. I have a sponsor for this video. I'm going to talk about them in a second. These guys are not the sponsor of my video. This is the MobaPad. This is for the original Switch, and I cannot wait for companies like MobaPad to make Joy-Cons like this for the Nintendo Switch 2, because even though the Switch 2 controls are much, much improved over the Switch 1, they still have a lot to be desired. I can get by fine with them. You don't need to buy a Pro controller or a third-party controller, but when they start coming out, I'm going to be picking them up. Since I'm talking about the controls, let's talk about the what's this thing called? The grip. This time there's no sliding system. It just snaps in on the back. You've got like these little rubber pads to keep the back of the controller from scratching up, from getting scratched up by the grip. And just like on the Nintendo Switch, they just snap in. It's really satisfying. The magnets in this are ridiculously strong. I was holding the grip in my hand, and I did just try and just yoink it off of here. I pulled as hard as I could, and then it ended up flying across the room. So don't do that. If you want to detach these things, it's super easy. You just pull on this little button right here, and it pops off. It's so satisfying because when you pull it, it just pushes up this little peg that happens to be right there. I'm going to try and put this on camera. Get it to focus on. There you go. That little peg pops up and it just separates so nicely and it snaps in perfectly. The mechanism that they have for attaching these Joy-Cons to the Nintendo Switch 2, brilliant design, absolutely brilliant design. And I hope Nintendo didn't patent it, because I want everybody to steal that for handheld portables, because it's really, really nice. Moving on to the screen. This screen is big. It's a VRR 120 hertz display. I know that people really, really like OLED, especially once we had the Switch came out with an OLED version. People were like, oh my God, it's beautiful. And they were right. I have an OLED Switch. It's really nice. This is also a ridiculously nice screen. This is a very good panel. It looks absolutely gorgeous. The colors just pop off of it. And the fact that it also has HDR, which is, I'm not super like versed in panels and displays and stuff like that, but isn't it weird to have an LCD panel that is also HDR? Anyway, I think the HDR really helps those colors pop, and it looks really good. I'm a huge fan of the panel on this thing, which is why I was really disappointed that Nintendo announced, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that they've got a cover on that panel, like a transparent film that most people would probably try and peel off. Nintendo, you probably should have put like a little sticker on there to warn people not to try and pull that off. I know they posted it on social media, but people aren't necessarily going to be on social media. This is designed to keep the screen from shattering and kind of exploding when you drop it. It will keep all of the glass in place when it does get dropped and it breaks, which sounds like a great idea. But it's also soft. So that means it can scratch easy, and those scratches are going to show up. So before I even put it in my dock, because I didn't want to risk anything, I decided to put on a screen cover from Dbrand, who is sponsoring this video. All right, so here's the screen protector from Dbrand, and it says, turn off your Switch 2 and detach the Joy-Cons. Well, I'm not going to turn it off because I'm downloading games, but I will detach the Joy-Cons. Okay, that was probably the easiest I've ever had installing a screen protector. It went on absolutely flawless. I'm really impressed. And in addition to the screen cover, which was incredibly easy to install, they also sent this case. Now, the Nintendo Switch is expensive. It's $450 before taxes, and you absolutely want to be able to protect it whenever you are taking it someplace. That's why I reached out to channel sponsor Dbrand to talk about their Kill Switch case for the Nintendo Switch. You can see it's got this hard shell over the top, which is really cool. And they have like this little bungee cord system in order to take the top shell off, which I will do now. There we go. We've got the top shell off. Before we get rid of that, you can see that I've got little spaces to keep all of my cards, which is really nice. I'm going to set that down off to the side. All right. So here you can see that we've got it in our Dbrand Kill Switch case. The what is this? The kickstand still works just fine. You can still have access to your SD cards, which is awesome. I have not yet taken off the little adhesive things because I'm probably going to end up giving this to my son because he travels with his Switch more than I do. So I'm going to put this on his Switch or Switch 2 instead of mine. So I haven't actually taken the little blue tabs off yet, but let's flip this over. You can see that it's not blocking the speakers at all or the USB port, but you're probably sitting there, well, now I can't take the Joy-Cons off. But yes, you can, because it just pops right off just like it did before. And so now if you look at the sides, this is very, very good because this makes the Switch Joy-Con 2s, Switch 2 Joy-Cons way more ergonomic in your hand. You've got this grip that your middle finger just kind of falls into that spot. Very, very comfortable to hold. And these are easy to put on and take off, so that's always nice. But if my Nintendo Switch 2 is turned on, you can see that it has no problem connecting or disconnecting. And next, you're probably wondering, well, Bill, is this thing going to fit in the dock? And yes, it is, but that's because Dbrand also has this adapter. Here's the Nintendo Switch dock. I've actually taken off the back panel of it. I'll put the back panel back on. It just goes on with like little clips. I think you got to put the top on first. There we go. Okay, so now the back panel is on. This, I mean, it might fit, but it's kind of tight, so I'm not going to risk that. Instead, Dbrand sent this over. This is really, really cool. So if you take a look on the bottom, we have a USB-C port right here. This drops. This part right here slides into the Switch 2 dock, and that little USB pin engages in it. And if you flip it around, it actually kind of looks like they were made to go together. And then if you want to dock your Nintendo Switch, you can just dock it right there on the front instead of sliding it in, which is really, really nice. There's a little bit of wiggle room here, which is good. But you get it seated there and bam, now you've got it docked. So if you are looking to take your Nintendo Switch 2 on the road and you want to protect it while you're out there, but you still want to be able to easily take the Joy-Cons on and off, then make sure you use the link in the description down below and you can save $35 off your purchase of Project Kill Switch for Nintendo Switch 2. Let's move on and talk about chat. This is one of Nintendo Switch's killer features for this system. I'm being a little sarcastic when I say killer features because it feels like we've been chatting with our friends online in video games for a very long time at this point, and Nintendo was just like, oh, that's a good idea. Why don't we try that? Well, they tried it. It actually works pretty damn well. I will say that I did try and hook up a camera that I had sitting around here in the NerdNest. Did not work. It told me no USB camera was connected. I can assure you one was. I wonder if it has to be something that's been like certified by Nintendo. I know that they do have third-party ones because there's that Piranha Plant one, but I wonder if it's something where Nintendo has to say yes to this one, no to that one because they paid a licensing fee or something. I wouldn't put that past Nintendo. But anyway, I plugged the webcam that I had laying around here in the NerdNest. No dice. It didn't work. But I did hop on voice chat with my friend Russ. And I gotta say, I am very impressed. Not because voice chat, I mean, big friggin' deal. Who cares? But the voice isolation on this, I was very skeptical about this voice isolation. It is impressive. So I had my Switch 2 sitting on my desk in front of me with my top-down camera pointed at it, and I had my phone playing music on YouTube Music, and I held it right up to the Nintendo Switch. And while I was talking to Russ, he could hear me, but he could not hear the music. And the music was coming out of the speaker on my phone nice and loud, and it was closer to the Switch 2 than I was. And he was like, yeah, I can't hear it. There was one time that he heard it. And it's funny that I say it one time because it was when I was playing Daft Punk One More Time. And they said one more time in the song and it picked it up. And you could see it on camera when my little icon lights up green. We also were able to share our screens with each other. So I could see what he was doing. He could see what I was doing. And when you first do it, it's like it's taking up way too much room. But if you go into the settings, you can change how big your screen is versus how big their screens are. And if you don't want to see their screens at all, you don't have to tell them stop sharing your screen. You can just make your screen full, like complete, take up everything. And then if somebody's like, hey, look at this, you just push the chat button on your controller and it kind of pops it off to the side so that you can see what your friend is trying to show you. It's a really cool feature, although it is like 10 frames per second. It's still neat, and it worked flawlessly. Like I didn't really have any hoops to jump through. Although I will say, if you are doing parental controls, this is a little frustrating. My son is turning 17 soon. I have to figure out how to remove parental controls from his Switch, but he had to send a parental control request to get on voice chat with me. He was like, okay, go into your parental controls app and accept the request to talk to you. So you have to approve chat for your kid on a game, on a person by person basis. Now, if your kids are young, that's fine. But if your kids are older and you're like, well, I trust you, I could not find anywhere in the parental control app where I could just say they can talk to whoever they want. They're big kids now. So that's one thing that I think is just needs a little more granularity, if you ask me. The speakers on the Switch 2 are really good. I feel like I'm actually impressed by the amount of sound that's coming out of them and the sound design of the menus as you are navigating the menu. Each individual item has its own little sound, and they all sound really satisfying and good. And I gotta say, whoever is in charge of sound design over at Nintendo for their user interface, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. That said, there's still no music. You don't have any background music that you can play, and I wish you could. And there's still no themes for some reason. But I don't want to go too deep into, the operating system today. I'm going to talk more about that in the future. So bottom line, the Switch 2 is awesome. And if it came out before we had all of these handheld PCs crowding up the market, boy, oh boy, I think it would be hard not to recommend the Nintendo Switch 2. I want to spend some more time with it before I actually give a full recommendation one way or the other. But I came away impressed, like very impressed, especially by the build quality and just how good it is to use. But today, the Switch 2 just isn't alone anymore, and we have a lot more options. None of the options that we have the build quality of the Switch 2, but I don't think that that's nearly as important for a gaming system as it is for, cell phones and that kind of thing. Nintendo has a really good device that feels, what's the word I'm looking for? Primary? No. Premium. That's the word I'm looking for. Premium. It feels premium in the hand. And I think that Nintendo, they're not chasing Steam Deck. They're not chasing handheld PCs. Nintendo is chasing Apple and Samsung and the phones out there. And because the Switch 2 is no longer alone in the handheld space, I feel like the launch lineup feels a little bit weak. Nintendo is launching this alongside their biggest game that they have, Mario Kart World. Mario Kart just sells like gangbusters. I think last gen Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a game that was a re-release of the Wii U game, sold 60 million units or something. I think it had like a 40% attach rate, which is a crazy number. And it makes sense that Nintendo would want to launch with this game, but I was looking at all of the launch games, and as somebody who has handheld PCs, I have most of the launch games. So it's pretty disappointing that we didn't get Metroid Prime 4 as a launch game on this, but I'm okay. I'm going to be playing a bunch of Mario Kart. It just as somebody who wants to review this, I wanted to try it on a bunch of different games, and most of the games are games that I already have. So it just feels kind of weird. I will say this before I wrap everything up. My son, he was playing Tears of the Kingdom, and then he came upstairs and he's like, I want to get the Tears of the Kingdom upgrade. And I was like, no, we have Nintendo Switch Online. You don't need that. And he said, oh, okay. So then he went downstairs and he installed it, and he came back upstairs and was like, wow, this looks so much better. The upgrade from the old Switch to the new Switch on Tears of the Kingdom, he was very, very impressed with. I'll talk more about that in my full review as well. And like I said, this is just my first impressions after just a few hours with the device. My full review is coming out next week, so subscribe for that and turn on notifications. And let me know what questions you have so that I can talk about those in my full review. Anyway, from the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.